Nioh 3 is a complex beast that involves hot swapping between two stances, managing multiple cooldowns, keeping an eye on up to 6 different meters, juggling multiple sets of item loadouts, all while balancing staying alive and trying to kill the fearsome yokai in front of you that won't leave you alone. Jesus Christ in heaven, stop for a second! Anyway, it's tough. There's no getting around that. But there are some tips that we can offer that will no doubt help you on your journey through the ages. Here are 13 essential tips you need to know in Nioh 3. Nioh 3 splits up your combat abilities into two different modes, Samurai and Ninja. Purists of Nioh may prefer Samurai stance due to its access to stamina restoring ki pulses and the flexibility of having the 3 different stances for each weapon, while others might prefer the mobility, ninjutsu, and added power of the ninja stance. But you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you just stuck to one over the other. The fact is that both modes have strengths and weaknesses, and you would benefit greatly from swapping between them when it makes sense to do so. Samurai mode excels at defense, thanks to its unique ability to deflect enemy attacks with proper guard timing, which lets you avoid taking damage without expending any ki, all while filling up your arts gauge, which will allow you to use empowered heavy attacks and skills for big damage. Ninja mode, on the other hand, is what you'll want to use if you have an opening to deal damage. By maneuvering around to an enemy's back, you're able to do huge damage that Samurai mode can only approach with a fully charged arts gauge. Not to mention, you can also more easily target enemy weaknesses with your elemental ninjutsu, or lay traps, or simply pepper enemies from afar, depending on what you have equipped. The point is, if you find yourself struggling against a tough enemy or boss, and you're only using either Samurai or Ninja style, consider switching it up and use the advantages of the other mode to try to give yourself an edge in combat. Nioh 3 is a bit different from previous games in that weapons no longer have letter scaling with stats. Instead, every weapon has 3 reference stats that scale its power the more points you put into those stats. The stat with the highest value will have the most effect on the weapon's strength, the next highest a moderate effect, and the lowest a minor effect. Ideally, you'll want to select weapons that share a reference stat so that you can greatly boost the power of both weapons by pulling your points into the same stat. So, for example, let's say that I want to main the Switchglaive in Samurai mode. The Switchglade's 3 reference stats are Skill, Intellect, and Magic. So, when I'm looking for a weapon to main in Ninja mode, the more of those stats I can match up, the better. Some ideal pairings include the single ninja sword and the hatchets, which both share skill and intellect as reference stats, the split staff and dual swords, which share intellect and magic, or the kusarigama, which shares skill and magic. The choice is yours, just make sure that you're dumping the majority of your points into the reference stats that your 2 main weapons share, and you'll see a substantial increase in your attack power. If later on you decide that you really want to use a weapon pairing that doesn't have matching reference stats, you can actually head to the blacksmith and remodel weapons that have at least a +1 value and change their reference stats to whatever you want. There are so many things to keep track of in Nioh 3 that it can be hard to even think about the 50 things that you've poured skill points into. But these skills can often be the difference maker between making it through to a new checkpoint, or dying right before one, and losing a large chunk of progress. Make it a routine after adding skill points to go into your customized martial arts / ninjutsu submenu and just go down through the list of techniques for your weapon and both samurai and ninja styles so that you have an understanding of all the abilities at your disposal. Make special note of which commands are parries, which one can inflict elemental damage, and what your aerial options are. You don't need to know what every technique you have does, and trying to learn too much at once will make everything harder to stick, so instead, you should focus your attention on a handful of the most useful ones and make it a habit to incorporate them into your combat. Aside from ki pulses and managing your stamina, the other most important element of combat are burst counters. To perform a burst counter, you must do a style transition from samurai to ninja or vice versa right before one of these glowing red attacks hit you. If you're successful, you'll do a big amount of ki damage to the enemy, stop their attack dead in its tracks, and restore a chunk of your own ki as well. Going for burst counters can be risky, as missing one will be extremely damaging to your health, but it's a risk that's almost always worth taking. Note that eventually you'll be able to use spirit skills to counter burst attacks as well, which is especially useful against burst attacks that have an extraordinarily long startup and would force you to basically just sit there doing nothing as you wait for the attack to actually launch. Rather than wait, you can just use a spirit skill right away. If you know that an enemy has one of these burst attacks with a long startup, consider holding onto your Guardian Spirit skill so that you can use it as a counter. Soul cores are these little red hearts that occasionally drop when you defeat an enemy. In Nioh 2, soul cores allowed you to quickly transform into a yokai and execute one of their signature attacks. In Nioh 3, the whole system has been reworked so that you can now choose to place a soul core in either the yin or yang position for 2 different types of Onmyo magic. If you place a core in the yang position, it basically has the same functionality as it did from Nioh 2, only instead of transforming into the yokai, you simply summon them to the battlefield, where they'll use one of their attacks and then disappear. It's a great way to pepper some extra damage onto a tough boss without putting yourself in a risky position, or to inflict some sort of status ailment on an enemy. If you place a core in the yin position, you'll gain a replenishable consumable item that you can set to your item shortcuts and refresh every time you rest at a shrine. By equipping soul cores in this way, you can gain powerful buffs, afflict enemies with debilitating debuffs, or even gain access to powerful spells. These abilities will be even more powerful if you've put a bunch of points into the magic stat. So if you're a person that uses a weapon that has magic as a reference stat, you're going to definitely want to make sure that you're making use of soul cores to their fullest potential. Another thing to keep in mind as you're adding stats during level ups in Nioh 3 is that there are certain stat thresholds that must be met in order to make a piece of gear's special effects activate. So, for example, when I hover over this piece of gear, you'll notice that all the special effects are grayed out. And underneath there's a line that says activation, and then it gives me the amount of stat points that I would need in order to unlock the effects of this piece of gear. The same is true for soul cores and accessories as well. For soul cores, many special abilities will be locked if your magic stat isn't high enough. And for accessories, if your intelligence isn't at a certain level, you'll find that many of the special effects of accessories will be completely locked out for you. Obviously, you still want to save the majority of your stat points for the stats that will increase the damage of your main weapons, but if you're close to a stat threshold and the special effects are especially good, definitely pop just enough points into a stat to unlock those effects. One of the great things about Nioh 3 is that respecs are completely free. So if you find that your current build just isn't doing it for you, feel free to go back to the drawing board and refund all of your points at the nearest shrine. This is especially helpful if you want to try out a new weapon, or maybe you just want to put a little more into your magic or ninjutsu power. Sometimes if you're stuck on a boss, the best way to make progress is to try a completely different approach. And the best way to do that is to respec into a completely different build. If you've played the previous 2 Nioh games, you're probably well familiar with these 2 jerks. Mujinas like to hide in treasure chests and pop out for a quick jump scare, and Nurikabes are demon walls that generally block the way to secret baths or treasure caches. While you can just brute force your way through these encounters, there's actually a non-violent way to claim their loot without putting yourself through a fight. When you encounter a Mujina, just sit tight and wait for them to perform an emote. If you're able to mimic that emote by going into your emote menu, it will drop all of its loot right there and then just disappear. If you get the emote wrong, or take too long, be ready for a fight against your doppelganger. For the Nurikabe, if you look closely, you'll be able to spot them from afar by looking for their eyes. Before you start swinging away at them, walk up close to them to the point where they open their eyes, and then use one of the 3 types of emotes: blue, yellow, or red. The Nurikabe is looking for either a red, blue, or yellow emote, and you essentially have 2 chances to get it right. That's a 2 out of 3 chance, so it's not terrible odds. If you see a nearby red gravestone, you can walk over to it to get a hint as to what kind of emote you're definitely not looking for, since that person would have been killed for using that type of gesture. Another thing that will dramatically help your build are skills, not to be confused with the equipable martial arts that you unlock from the skill tree. As you explore the open world, clearing points of interest and opening treasure chests, you'll no doubt unlock a ton of skills for both samurai and ninja styles. Make sure that you're taking the time every now and then to take a look at what skills you have, what makes sense for your build, what's worth keeping, what's worth replacing, etc. Some noteworthy skills that you should definitely consider equipping include Supreme Shift for the ninja. This teleports you behind an enemy after executing a style switching burst counter, which is exactly where you want to be to maximize your damage after landing one. Yokai Banisher, also in ninja, makes it so that you can use the ninja's miss technique, right bumper or R1 after an attack, to dispel yokai realm puddles, which mitigates one of ninja style's big weaknesses: the fact that you can't key pulse to dispel the yokai realms. Unshakable in samurai form, reduces the damage you take. Indomitable Spirit, also in samurai form, increases your ki recovery speed when your life is less than 30%, which will be a literal lifesaver in certain situations. Panacea Cure Fast in general, increases the life restored by elixirs by 15%. This is just a great skill that's useful for any type of build. And finally, Repel Expert, also in general, extends the timing window for a style shift burst break, which is great because you're going to be using those a lot, and the timing can occasionally be hard to find against new enemy types. Spirit skills are one of the most important tools in your arsenal, as they are powerful attacks that aren't tied to your stamina meter, and eventually, as mentioned earlier, they'll be able to knock enemies out of their burst attacks. These are performed by holding the left bumper and pressing either triangle or square, and their effects vary wildly from Guardian Spirit to Guardian Spirit, so make sure that you test them out and get a sense for their range and area of effect. One very important thing to remember about spirit skills is that you can use them even when you're in an exhausted state after getting hit while out of stamina. So if you find yourself stunned and defenseless, think of your spirit skill as a last-ditch effort to try to create some distance so you can regain your stamina and heal up. Speaking of stamina, or ki in Nioh, there are two types of enemy stamina bars, blue and purple. Blue bars are typically reserved for human enemies. These work very much like your own stamina bar. They deplete quickly while the enemy is attacking and blocking, but refill just as fast when they disengage. Once you deplete their stamina, they'll be open for a grapple for big damage while their stamina replenishes. Purple bars are for yokai and behave quite differently. For one, they replenish much slower, but do not go down when the enemy attacks. Instead, while the enemy is attacking, it just doesn't go back up. Every attack you land adds a little bit of red ki damage that reduces the maximum amount of stamina that they can restore. If you're able to find that particular yokai's weakness, typically the yellow horns or stones that they have on their head or bodies, you'll do a big chunk of red ki damage and dramatically reduce the amount of stamina they can regenerate. Once you deplete their whole bar, they'll be in a staggered state where every attack you land will cause them to recoil. This is your opportunity to absolutely unload on them, as you'll interrupt everything they do. Be aware though that eventually they will do some sort of uninterruptible attack that places a yokai pool on the ground and restores their stamina up to the point of their red ki damage. Or if it's a boss, they'll transition into the yokai realm. If you're able to make their entire stamina bar red ki damage, you'll drop the boss and will be able to grapple them for big damage. That's a lot to keep in mind, but what basically it boils down to is, human enemies are squishier, but better at guarding and parrying to protect their stamina. It can often work to your advantage to let them self-tire themselves out, and then attack when their stamina is low. Yokai enemies, on the other hand, encourage you to be aggressive so that they don't regenerate their massive stamina bars. Just a quick note here, don't forget about your prestige points. You'll get these by completing various challenges and earning titles, like defeating a certain number of enemies in either samurai or ninja style, deflecting X amount of enemy attacks while in samurai stance, or dealing a certain amount of damage when using ninjutsu. Earning these titles will get you prestige points, which you can spend at the Obtain Prestige from Titles menu, and add to a number of categories that will enhance your performance in battle. And finally, let's just really quick cover some tips about loot. We'll have a full video going into this in more depth, but the big secret about loot in Nioh 3 is that it largely doesn't matter until you reach New Game Plus. That's not to say you should just never equip new loot, but more that you don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of build crafting and min-maxing on your first playthrough. And in fact, if you do try to do so, you'll no doubt become frustrated due to the rate with which your gear gets out-leveled, or worse, you might become overly attached to a specific piece of gear that has long since outlived its usefulness. Fortunately, there's a handy-dandy auto-equip feature in the gear menu that you can use to very quickly put on the gear that has the highest gear score. Rely on this throughout your first playthrough, and I promise you'll have a better time without getting bogged down by the numbers and tiny bonuses that ultimately mean very little in the grand scheme of things. If you find a piece of loot that has exceptionally good stats or special abilities, these are usually marked with a star, you can lock it in your inventory so that you don't accidentally scrap it. You can do the same for weapons or pieces of gear that are parts of sets, which give powerful bonuses if you manage to collect the other pieces of the set. These more valuable pieces of gear can be held onto and eventually soul matched at the blacksmith to bring up to your current level. But again, do not worry about this until you're in New Game Plus. Otherwise, you'll just be wasting resources that could be better used for pieces of gear that aren't going to be outleveled in just a few hours of play. And with that, you've now got all the knowledge you'll need to conquer the intense difficulty of Nioh 3. The rest is all on you. Thanks for watching, and for more Nioh 3, make sure to check out our more in-depth guide to loot, skills to get first, and more. And for everything else in the world of video games, keep it here on IGN.